Sure. I'd like to kind of reflect on that with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which passed last year, with a tremendous investment in internal infrastructure, including ways to get us off of fossil fuels, which is part of this is about. Let's stop emitting fossil fuels and transition over to renewables. That requires some infrastructure upgrades, particularly distribution line upgrade. But I like to think of infrastructure. You look at a city like Indianapolis, right? Yeah. And I'm going to go completely away from power and go to your water. Yeah. You've probably heard of Flint, Michigan. How many people have heard of Flint, Michigan? Not just that it's a town in Michigan, but that they had a horrific lead poisoning crisis there that was only detected after 10,000 kids were poisoned. So you think, oh, well, but that was weird. That's Flint, Michigan. There's no harm here. We have more miles of lead service lines in the city of Bliss than Flint, Michigan did. We don't know where they are. It's a challenge.
We don't, hold on. We don't know where.
Guesses. It's kind of like this book. They're talking, how old are some of the poles and the fixtures? We kind of think we know, but it makes a big difference, right? If you want to replace the lines, well, now you've got to go down and dig up streets. They're all underground.
Okay, I read this thinking, oh, that's wild that they don't have any records of anything. That must just be them.
That's very normal. That's very normal.
In your experience,
yes.
That's not.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time rooting around in basements of buildings looking for drawings to try and document things when we're putting an addition on a hospital and we need to know, say, the generator, emergency distribution. And a lot of times we end up just taking taking the information that we have, and then, when the contractor starts demolition in a hospital and we can finally see what's above the ceiling and what's behind the walls. And then, we hope somebody wrote in a Sharpie on a junction box 20 years ago. That's not unusual, unfortunately. So one of your questions that you sent to us earlier this week was, were you surprised? And I was like, I can't wait to talk about this because this didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, so you had the opposite reaction. You read this book and said, yeah, that's consistent with my lived experience.
Yes.
Working in, I don't know, keeping the lights on at hospitals. No big. Hope some guy with a Sharpie knew what he was doing.
Correct.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I'm like, I have to laugh because that, to me, I assume it's such an integrated network. It's so expansive. It's so technical. Of course, they have the best record keeping. Not only is this an issue in California with PG&E, we have the issue in our waterways. We have the issue. So part of the problem with aging infrastructure, because I wanted to ask, the consequences of allowing, this aging infrastructure to sit. Because we see in this book the consequences, right? We see gas explosions, we see wildfires, but you also don't not only know the problem, you don't know the expanse of the problem, and how can you begin to fix something that you just have really little to no insight into? So is that, I don't know, maybe you could provide insight into the bipartisan infrastructure law. Is that something that is being addressed by regulatory bodies? Is this new?
To some extent, I think the challenge is that we built a lot of our infrastructure for the time it worked at that time. So I think of the other side of our waterway issue, right? So I talked about lead service lines. Well, they worked really well, except they poisoned kids, and then we realized, oh shit, we can't use those anymore. But by the same consequence, we built our entire sewer system, allowing occasional releases of our toilet water into all of our waterways when it rained a lot. Well, that was fine in 1920 when Indianapolis was small. They didn't have a lot of pavement and climate wasn't as extreme as it is now. But you add not much space for water to infiltrate. Like look at the landscape here. Got a building, got a street, you got a parking lot, there's a parking lot there. If it rains here, where's the water gonna go? It goes right in the storm sewer, which when they are over capacity, they dump straight into the White River or into Fall Creek or Pleasant Run. So it's
it was fine when it was built. It's not fine anymore.
Yeah.
And it just costs a lot. And this is what was coming up in this book a lot, I thought, is that right now, for the last 5 years, I live in Indianapolis, we've all been paying about 5 times more for our sewage fee on our water was combined than we did before this, because we're having to make up for 80 years of no investment in our sewer system. That's all. And that's exactly what they're talking about here with electricity, right?
Is this a national problem for almost all utilities?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so terrible. I feel like it's one of those things, you use it every day, you assume that it is. And also another aspect of this that shocked me was the lack of oversight and regulation, how recent it came to be and then the question of who regulates and who sets that guidance. A lot of this was driven by the California state legislature. Is there more federal involvement now? They don't really talk about it in the book, or is it very state by state?
It's actually state by state.
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah, so
That is so bonkers.
is it Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission? So yeah, each state has their own regulatory
And
body.
the challenge is the regulatory body kind of is not in cahoots with the people who generate power, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, they're not there to protect the consumer. And
No.
actually, just an interesting tidbit, if you go to the Regulatory Commission's website, there is a line on there that says that they are not there for the benefit of the customer. They're not even trying to hide it from us. They're not, they're not acting with our best interest at heart.
Really any interest, because the service is not a best interest. It is just a interest. A human and even profit-driven interest. But even that is just kind of, at this point, it's so ubiquitous, we have to use it to function.
Yeah.
So they don't even have to worry about it being good. Just, hey, as long as it's there most of the time.
And we do suffer from the state by state regulation. I think 2 years ago where Texas had a bizarre climate fuel deep freeze. They mentioned this in the book briefly.
Yes.
Which shut down their electrical supply system in the cold part of the winter because most of the supply system was run on were natural gas systems, and the valves froze because they never made them to handle extreme climate change. And Texans I don't know if you ever heard that Texans are a little bit stubborn. I don't know. Supposedly they are.
As a Floridian, can confirm.
And they refuse to hook up to the electrical infrastructure outside the state of Texas because they'd have to pay a fee. Or there's some shenanigans like that. And they said, no, I don't want to do that. So they had no backstop for their production. So they weren't producing enough electricity. They had to shut out 30,000, 100,000, 30,000 or a million people. They said, well, we can't give you power for a day or 2 or 4.
Yeah, so the infrastructure, if you're in Marion County, you have AES, formerly IPL, and then if you're outside Marion County, you have Duke. But the energy that you're getting to your house might not belong to them. So there are independent system operators, which I think she touches on in the book, and they're kind of like the brokers of everything. And the grid, the infrastructure for most of the country is interconnected. And I wish I had printed this out, but I was actually looking at a map of which independent system operators service which areas of the country. Because I don't know if any of you drive by this really secure building in Carmel, MISO, but they're the Midwest Independent System Operator. And if you, through whatever professional organization or whatever, get a chance to tour it, it's a really cool. You have to go through a background check and sign up months in advance. But if you ever have an opportunity, it's just really fascinating to tour. But anyway, looking at that map, Texas is completely isolated. And so, like Gabe said, they're kind of, they've cut themselves off.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's even an option. Okay. I feel like every other sentence I've heard from either of you has like sent me into like a spiral and shocks and like no, it's okay. I'm just like the ignorant American sitting here like, yeah, I plug it in and it works. Like beyond that, what do I know? And so reading this book with so many shocks, but this takes place in California, so I'm thinking I'm in the Midwest. The Midwest is resilient. So the Midwest, well, Rachel, don't look like that. And so to hear that these problems are pervasive, and not only through the Midwest, but through pretty much every utility that we use on every day, it's just kind of mind-boggling to see not only the lack of oversight, but the lack of attention that's been paid for not just, this is a problem that popped up in the last 5-10 years. Decades of issues piling and piling and piling to culminate, in the events we talk about in this book.
Well, it's been 20 years since the Northeast blackout that affected how many millions of customers?
Millions, yeah.
And that was because a relay was left in maintenance mode. And so instead of when a tree limb fell on a line, instead of something shutting off and isolating the failure to a very small area, it ended up being it was like the second largest blackout in the
is that
country.
a person who is, or is that kind of an automatic?
That's hard. Okay, so that's hard to say. So I feel like Catherine Blunt did a really good job when she was talking about the trial of how you couldn't pinpoint any one person. Because these people end up, you get the feeling that PG&E doesn't have a great company culture.
I got that.
To put it mildly.
That is the nicest way I've heard that put. Yeah.
It might have been a little bit toxic, but you end up in this environment and you have all of these, you should have a lot of levels of checks and balances, but you have your lowest guy on the totem pole, and he's told by the next guy, do this thing because he was told by this guy because they cut that guy's budget, and and then you end up in a company that large with just this intricate web of whose fault is it really? And I think she did a really good job of, I feel like if somebody with a lot of scruples might not have stayed in their career at PG&E for very long. But I think that she did a very good job of explaining that it was really systemic of the company.
Yeah, no, and I feel like the author almost uses that to not demonize, the people working in this company.
Except for maybe the hedge fund managers on the board.
And there was a lot of Enron shade too.
Yeah,
There's a lot of Enron is real bad, which I think we knew, but got to slip that one in there.
Yeah.
And so I have a question for you all, the audience, who read this book or didn't read this book. This felt like an interplay. As I was reading the book, I felt like I was going back and forth on, this is a climate change issue. This is an infrastructure issue. And so I feel like it's a chicken or the egg argument. And I know chicken or the egg. It's pineapple on pizza all over again. I know. But I feel like the question is, what is the higher priority? Addressing climate change or addressing an aging infrastructure? Both make the other worse. And will fixing one fix the other? No, but they're both terrible. And which is why it's a chicken or the egg argument. It is which is worse, the lesser of the two evils. But I feel like, towards the end, when we start getting into more of resolution phase of the book, it feels not like a resolution. It almost feels like people tried prioritizing one or the other. Neither kind of worked. And so everybody just threw their hands up and said, it all sucks. I can't fix it. And so I want to ask you, our experts, our guest experts, you as well, guest experts, but audience guest experts, what do you think is more important to fix? Infrastructure or climate change? So I'll give you like 5-10 minutes and you can not yell at each other, but maybe engage in heated debate. And then we'll come back and we'll see if our experts have anything to say about what choice you made. So maybe choose carefully. All right.
Sorry. Like this. Sorry.
Oh.
I was trying to not be like this, and then I set it down.
It's gonna attack you.
Um,
I don't know. Is that bad? I don't know.
what, the chicken and the egg?
Yeah, the chicken or the egg. Is it?
I think
what's
you need
more
both.
important, climate change or infrastructure?
You have
'Cause
to.
obviously both are important, but I feel like what we saw with the California legislature was, prioritizing climate change, and then, ooh, this is still a problem.
But I
okay,
don't-
we got to fix the infrastructure. Ooh, but like that's hard too.
And-
So then, like, what do we? I don't know. It felt very back and forth to me.
You probably have a lot more insight into this, but it didn't feel like they were prioritizing climate change so much as they were like prioritizing the profits of looking like they were prioritizing climate change when they were putting money into like solar and wind
Yeah,
but
those capital investments, because that's what they make money off of.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen kind of over and over again, even here in Indy, where when we have big influxes of funding to deal with our infrastructure, we tend to plan for the infrastructure, the climate state of today and not the climate state of 20 years. This infrastructure will last for 20, 30, 40 years. We don't, and in fact, Indiana specifically disallows that. Like for our flood insurance maps this year, they wanted to use new we have phenomenal data now for Indiana, so we can rewrite all of our flood risk maps for the state of Indiana, so we can redefine floodplain. Because our flood maps don't work anymore. Like a 1,000-year floods are happening every 10
Right.
years. And obviously, statistics doesn't work out. So, and what did our state house do? Said, nope, you got to still use the old maps because.
Why?
And why? Well, because the real estate law is so powerful that they told the state house, no, you can't use those because people aren't going to buy houses anymore. Because so many more houses are going to be in floodplains that they had to pay extra mortgage on. Yes, it was all. It's so
What?
yes, you have to plan for the future, but you also can't. Like Indiana has a famous history of just like thinking in the past. So that was clearly obstructionist. In the case of California, they might be doing some kind of lip service for the future, but not a whole lot.
Yeah. So just a prime example of how Indiana will not get with the times. Our electrical building codes
Oh no.
are from 2008. I bought a copy of the National Electric Code that Indiana enforces at half price books for $15.
Half price books. Not sponsored.
Because
but
I
they're great.
couldn't buy it from the NFPA anymore, and I have access to it online, but I like to have the paper. I like a physical book when I'm working, and I couldn't find it anywhere. Half price books. Yeah.
Hey, ever wanted to know what your utility code is?
half
Get a
price
half-price
books. Yeah.
That's do you have any insight into how differently Indiana manages utilities compared to other like states, since it seems to be very state specific?
On the utility side, I can't really say.
No.
As far as like energy code, so thinking ahead and trying to be more energy efficient. Our energy code is older than our electrical code. We're actually using 2007 ASHRAE 90.1.
Oh.
So we're using 2007's energy code, which just barely requires automatic lighting controls. So in large buildings, lighting is historically one of the largest loads. So like that's why LEDs were a game changer, right? Because you you could not do anything else, just switch out all your lights to LEDs, and you could reduce your energy consumption by like huge amounts. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for a lot of, manufacturing plants, campuses, things like that.
Yeah.
But with our with our energy code, if I do a whole building with LEDs, I'm like 50% over what my required energy efficiency is with lighting, because Indiana doesn't. Well, our energy code is outdated. That's really it.
Standard, or is it just based on kind of?
So, well, so that's the other thing. It's like really disconnected. So,
Okay.
a lot of states use the International Energy Code, so the IECC, and then some states use ASHRAE, which is actually a mechanical building code.
Yes. My family sells commercial air conditioners.
Yes.
So we're very familiar with
so you're
ASHRAE.
like ASHRAE, what?
Yeah,
Energy
my
code?
dad sells air conditioners.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. So Indiana uses
Okay.
ASHRAE as their energy code, and an old version of the ASHRAE standards as their energy code.
Wild.
And so it has gotten to the point where so like California pushes a lot of like car manufacturers and other technologies, because they're not going to have two manufacturing lines, right? They're going to design to the tightest standards. So with lighting controls, in most states, when you have everything automatically turn on, it can only turn on to 50%, and the occupant has to go over and physically turn it up, because humans are, lazy. Usually, first of all, we don't need rooms to be that bright, but we have conflicting standards that make us light rooms that bright. So anyway, so these automatic controls, manufacturers of lighting controls are now, you can only get controllers that will turn your lights on to 50%. And my clients in Indiana are getting mad because they don't want to have to walk over and turn the dimmer up, because that code doesn't apply to us in Indiana. But it doesn't matter, because lighting control manufacturers don't care. They're not going to pay for two manufacturing lines.
No, I see. Okay.
So all that is to say, Indiana is very backwards,
In so many
very
ways.
outdated. Yeah.
I feel like that's like another peg or maybe like another tally to the line of, I'm shocked at how little standardization there is and how little oversight there is. That boggles my brain. I work in a very regulated industry, and so like that to me doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Somebody not breathing down your neck at every move, not so foreign to me. So I am going to bring us back, because I'm curious what other people think. Climate change or infrastructure?
But did we answer that?
What do you think?
Climate change or infrastructure?
What's the bigger problem, or what needs to be fixed first?
They both have to be fixed at the same
Yeah,
time.
Fair. I feel like we almost let both sit too long.
But you have one inform the other. That's the thing. You have climate change inform what you're planning for infrastructure.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So we're fighting a losing battle.
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good.
That's the best thing I've heard in the last, I don't know,
We can do
hour.
It. We can do it. It's just you have to have the political will, and it's starting to you're starting to see it. Infrastructure bill and then the climate bill within 2 years. Like, that's the direction to go.
Absolutely.
I don't want to talk about it next election. It just makes me.
Ugh.
Oh, yeah, no.
No.
Okay, I think we're ready. All right. What do we think? I know I will go ahead and spoiler alert for you. We landed at a both, which I know is a cop out. It's not picking one, but it's not only, I will say, you had a great point, Gabe, that it's not both because they both need to be done, but both because they both can be done at the same time. And so you don't have to pick. So for if any of you were strong-willed enough, because we were not, we are in the both train, but maybe it's because there's three of us, so we feel like we can divide and conquer. Did anybody pick one? Or raise your hand if you said both. Both are important. But see, we got a lot of hands. Okay, so some of y'all also took the both are important, both can be fixed. And I love that for us. I love the optimism. I want that for us and for our future. Did anybody pick, was anyone opinionated enough or strong-willed enough to actually pick one? If you feel like one was more important. Ooh, we got hands, y'all. All right, does anyone want to defend their position? Does anyone want to talk about why? Knowing that there's a both crowd up here. That's okay. We're nice. We don't bite. I promise. Yeah? All right. Now, well, you got to start off. Which one did you pick? Infrastructure. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Infrastructure, utility bridges, better pipes, better sewers. We've got technology.
Yeah.
There are ways to prevent, as we saw before, fires from starting like Solution.
Yeah.
With me.
Yeah.
Keep the trees down. Barrier.
I was going to say, it looks like they're trying to bury transmission lines right now. Yep, barium's good.
I understand some of the, that still, you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. And as you said, the infrastructure bill is doing some of that. And I've been,
Yeah.
we were talking, we've seen estimates by the civil engineers, about $6 trillion of infrastructure from airports, roads, railroads.
Yeah.
Everything. So there's a
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. It's something more immediate. It's tangible. So maybe an easier sell than something a little more that feels more obscure and long lasting. You're not going to see an immediate impact, but
Some people commented here, infrastructure, it wouldn't have the impact of global warming. Because you wouldn't have so many cars sitting out, waiting to move, some conditions,
Yeah.
really better lines, better electrical, vehicles.
yeah.
Our more charging stations.
Yeah. And maybe one cheat sheet away to support your infrastructure argument is considering energy production, which is something we haven't really touched on, but that also making that greener feeds into the infrastructure. I don't know. So that's compelling. Did anybody feel strongly? Did anyone feel strongly about acting on climate change? Yes. Snaps to you. Now, do you want to defend that? That is such a good metaphor too, because I feel like climate change is like the dirty laundry that we've just like let sit, and it like has piled up, and it's just kind of like there, and we know it's there and getting worse, and we're just really not doing anything about it. So that's actually I'm gonna keep that one. I'm keeping that one in the bank, because calling climate change dirty laundry that's just getting nasty, it reminds me of college. But yes, I think it's accurate. Do you guys have any? Obviously we picked both. But I kind of want to lead into the energy production side, because they talk about how, it's kind of a capital investment, so they kind of benefit from it. But it seems like they're really only investing in renewable energy as far as they can throw it, for lack of a better analogy. And so do you think that, obviously the way that we produce energy will change, but do you think that climate change and maybe even moving to renewable sources will change the way we transport energy? And I'm thinking even like things like solar, for example, you can do much more locally. And so maybe transmission line, I don't know, maybe transmission lines are obviously still going to be important, but are we changing the way that we're designing that? I don't know. And so I'd be curious to hear both of your thoughts. Maybe it's already happening. I don't know.
Well, we work on that like a lot at the Environmental Resilience Institute. So we work with local communities and business and nonprofits to help consult with them on climate change, climate resilience planning.
Yes.
So sometimes they're faced with this very simple decision, and it links infrastructure with climate. Okay, the simple decision is they've got a small fleet of vehicles that are currently gas powered, and they're watching the gasoline prices go up, and they're aging, and they need to figure out, well, what's going to be the next choice? Well, the EVs or the plug-in hybrids are slightly more expensive, but when we kind of work them through, like, yes, they're more expensive now, but if you also build out a municipal solar array where you plug these things in and put a power bank, you not only have vehicles that are powering locally, but the battery bank is dealing with disastrous power outages, for example, and theoretically they can backfill the grid, the local grid at least. So I think we're seeing more conversation about not nationalizing their grid, well, doing that, but also localizing the grid. So local solutions can work for local people. So this is kind of this issue of, you're right, infrastructure helps you right now. It doesn't keep, we're not waiting on other countries to act on climate, right? We're actually dealing with our roads.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see these things evolve together. And this is, and that's what communities want to know, like, how can I tell my ratepayers or my voters that the reason I've got a big photovoltaic array and I paid extra money for EVs is because in 5 years, I'm going to be making money. And I'm going to be making my community more resilient to climate change. And that argument resonates because it's dollars.
Yeah.
I love this topic. So they're called
Wow.
microgrids, and they're becoming really popular for hospitals
Wow.
basically on the coast. So where you have a lot of utility deregulation. So for a hospital, you have to have a backup power source. And traditionally, that's a diesel generator. And you can kind of see the confidence and the reliability of the utilities decrease. In 2017, the National Electrical Code added a clause that if you're required to have a backup generator, you actually have to have a backup to your backup. And what that means is that you have to be able to plug a portable generator in to your facility in case your generator that's supposed to be your backup fails. So I think that's just part of the. We don't have a lot of confidence in the reliability of the electrical utilities. But so on top of having a generator, now what a lot of hospitals are doing is implementing these microgrids. And a lot of times it's solar, and a lot of times they have batteries for storage. And so what that allows them to do is they're avoiding peak demand charges. So, the hottest point of the day, they're getting, they're producing the most power from these photovoltaic arrays. And eventually they can sell that power back. So they're saving money, maybe making money, and it's more reliable because it's, so solar arrays, there's sort of climate friendly, but not really when you think about the manufacturing process. But there's this, there's kind of like the image of them being climate friendly. So you have the climate change piece, but then you're no longer relying on the regional grid. Your independent system operator, your utility going out and trimming trees or putting relays back in operation mode instead of maintenance mode. So it's really, I know there are parts of infrastructure that are separate from climate, but I feel like they're just so interconnected And I mean, we're seeing the same thing with a lot of healthcare networks.
Can I add on that point just briefly?
Yeah.
So this summer, we've had obviously heat wave after heat wave. Texas experienced massive heat wave for about a month. And I heard Texas congressional members say, well, thank God we got oil and gas electrical production, because, if we were relying on wind and solar, who knows where we'd be. It ended up that there's 550 failures of electrical production in Texas during the heat wave. Every single one of them were a gas in natural gas or in coal facility. Why? Their cooling water is too hot. Why? Because of climate change, right? What stabilized their entire grid? Wind and solar. That's the only thing. That's the only reason why the lights didn't shut out and the electricity didn't cut off.
You're telling me a man in Texas said there ain't no sun? There ain't a lick of sun out here. Not enough. Not for me. That's
So renewable, stable. People say, well, they're unreliable. No, it's renewables plus battery storage is incredibly predictable. Why? Because the sun rises in the morning, so you know when it's going to be high. Yeah, you might have some cloud dampening of the sun, and then it goes down. Wind is often blows at night, and so how is that not reliable when you're having to shut down your coal and gas plants because the cooling water's now way too hot?
It's 100 degrees outside and you're shocked the water is in a pipe near also 100 degrees.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Well, because you have like these closed systems for cooling where the water is piped through to cool and then it's piped somewhere else to cool off and come back in and continue cooling your equipment.
Yeah.
But where do you go to cool off when it's 120 degrees outside?
Yeah.
And you're in Texas, so I don't know what the highs were, but
I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's from a systems perspective, it's kind of a no-brainer. Like, no, your cooling water can't cool off.
Yeah. Yeah. If 120 is cool, we got issues because
Yeah.
that is not cool. And so I do want to ask you specifically, Gabe, I want to ask you, we talk about renewable energy. So we're focusing really on solar and wind, but they actually, and I know this is kind of controversial in the climate change space, but atomic energy and nuclear energy, what are the thoughts on that as a green energy? I know it's kind of back and forth and some people feel really strongly against it, but a lot of people are really strongly for it. This author seems to be very for it. And it seems like it's working for California and for PG&E, but I don't know, what are your thoughts on the trend of moving towards atomic versus, like solar, where I know we have issues with like rare earth mineral mining and stuff like that.
Well, it's funny, like you often get these either or questions, right? When in fact we're all smart enough to know that there's nuances in everything. You get no free ride on this thing, right? You buy an EV, and that's great. You're not actually producing local air pollution, and you are powering your vehicle much more efficiently than with an internal combustion engine, which aren't very efficient actually. They're only 30% efficient. 70% of it is heat loss, right? So
I don't need that.
But yeah, EVs, they take a lot of money to produce. They're heavier than normal cars, so they have more wear and tear on roads, and they've got some recycling and mineral problems. So there's no free ride.
Yeah.
That's what I like to emphasize. So there's no like this or that. It's this and that.
Mm-hmm.
But where I see the landscape going with nuclear recently is that was an industry that was handcuffed by regulation. So after 3 Mile Island,
Yes.
it was like, we do not like nuclear now, and so many regulations were put on them that an otherwise pretty amazingly safe power source was demonized.
Yeah.
How many people have died from coal burning power plant pollution, air pollution? How many die right now, every year around the world? About 4 million people die from pollution from coal burning power plants alone. So that's not dangerous? Like, how do you classify your understanding of risk?
Yeah.
So the difference with nuclear is they're really hard to build big. They're really easy to build small now.
Huh.
And so along with the microgrid, there's like more and more you just say, let's not build a huge San Onofre power plant or Diablo Canyon. I did all my PhD work right there, San Luis Obispo, actually, right next to that power plant. Kind of a little bit terrified, but for no good reason. But you can put these things and support our regional grids much better. So if you were to ask me 5 years ago, I'd say, we've got to get back into nuclear or maybe small nuclear. Now I'm thinking, after seeing the Texas example, maybe battery storage and wind and solar and biomass might be almost good enough. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's fair. That's
I'm just
fair.
saying almost good enough. And so I don't know.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on atomic, nuclear?
I'm very pro-nuclear.
Okay.
It's so much
I'm not
more.
anti-nuclear, so
Yeah,
it's okay.
it's
I'm not
so-
gonna
I know,
attack
I know,
you.
I know it's a divisive subject.
Yeah.
But it's so much cleaner than what we have, and the waste. And this was like years ago when I studied this, but the waste for powering, say, a city the size of Indianapolis for a year takes up such a small footprint that, when you look at coal plants, what happens to the coal once they've burned through its useful life? These companies purchase places to just bury it, and then it leaches into the ground, and it's to me, nuclear is efficient. I know it's a little bit scary because
because we all just saw Oppenheimer. Yes.
yeah, we all just saw Oppenheimer. And you have like 3 Mile Island and Fukushima and things like that.
Yeah. Well, even the places where that atomic waste is buried, do we have the longevity of research to know that storage is safe? I don't know.
Storage is on site still.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
they
is
store
it
everything
really?
on site. Because
Okay.
But
we don't
there's so
transport it.
little of it. They don't have to
Oh.
truck it somewhere else.
I love that you call it atomic too.
It's not.
Sounds like we're like,
Like
in
I
the
said.
atomic in the 1950s.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
really
like I
fun.
just said, I may or may not have just seen Oppenheimer, so
Like
maybe I'm a little.
every car will have a little atomic engine.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things, like, there's no like one answer. There's no one solution. Nobody wants to live near a nuclear power plant. Like, nobody wants to operate a business or build their their downtown like district near a nuclear facility.
That's fair.
That's fine. Just fill it up with solar panels. It's.
Or people. I mean, I've lived near nuclear power plants. Maybe that explains a lot. But
Good.
I mean, people live next to coal plants, and those seem a lot
Way
worse,
worse.
a lot more
Demonstrably, yeah.
immediately than a nuclear plant. So I really appreciate both of your perspectives because it's always been presented to me as very divisive. But I guess when you're comparing it to a coal-fired power plant and fossil fuels generally, it's kind of like the clear
choice.
answer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I want to give us time to get into Q&A with you guys because we haven't even touched wildfires, which I don't know is in the title. And I would love to ask you about those, but I also want to give you all an opportunity to talk infrastructure, to talk regulation. I feel like there's so many aspects and little nuggets in this book. I didn't want to talk legal. Because there's a lot of talk about the court cases and how the victims really didn't, even though this company was found criminally liable multiple times, really none of the victims got anything for years. And you hear the story of this poor man who lost his home and thankfully was able to save his family. Years later, not a dime to, rebuild a house or to buy a new house. And, years on the hook, and the judge won't even hear him out. He has to start trying to file official documents with the court, which if you're not a trained lawyer is very overwhelming. So I feel like there's a lot of directions I could go, but I want to know what you're most interested in either hearing about or talking more about. Maybe there was an aspect of the book that surprised you or didn't surprise you. I was going to ask you what surprised you, but both of you seem not surprised. So I want to hear from you. I want to know what you like. Maybe you hated this book. You thought it was terrible. I have been describing it as a downer. This was a downer. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Back there, long sleeves. Okay. Can you repeat that one more time, a little louder? Okay, so like how Indiana will be impacted by it. Can you repeat the question?
We're having the
We-
problem.
yeah.
because the
I
speaker
think
as
it's just
well, yeah.
because the speakers are pointed literally the opposite direction.
Fusion. Oh, fusion.
Oh, boy.
I don't know.
Fusion.
There's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of talk for 40 years about fusion. But
Well,
I don't know if there's
didn't
an
they just
answer.
recently demonstrate net positive energy?
Using about 8,000 times more energy, they finally
Oh.
made something produce some energy.
A tiny little bit.
Yeah, but they made it work. But it was an 8,000-fold really net loss of. But you sounds like you know something about fusion. So
So we had a science of science fiction. So Indiana Sciences does a bunch of other stuff. And one of the things we do at Gen Con every year are these science of science fiction panels. And so I am not an expert, but we had an expert who described the situation.
Okay.
And it does not, I don't think that fusion is practical for energy production. It's
Okay.
that was, and she's somebody who I would consider an expert. Yeah.
Oh, in that experiment. Okay.
Yeah.
but we are benefiting from fusion power every single time we make electricity from a solar panel. That's what the
Okay.
sun does. Sun does it pretty damn well. So yeah, we are using fusion power.
That's the
It's
real
just
expert.
Via solar voltaic.
I love that.
The common theme I saw in the book was corporate greed.
I didn't even get there.
There's a very interesting section there talking about corporations and that they're considered individuals in our constitution, but yet not will go to jail.
Yes, which was part of why the settlement was so low.
How many times do we talk about maintenance wasn't made because the money
Money's not there.
there, you know, and the not only about nuclear power plants, I wouldn't mind them, but I don't want a private, for-profit.
Mm.
Running.
Yeah.
And I think she has a good discussion in there about the problem with utilities is the whole idea about now is that they're supposed to be regulated, but they are not.
Yeah.
The ownership of at least generation, maybe even transmission, out of their hands.
Yeah. 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 Well, and it sounds like some of the towns tried to. They were trying to buy the transmission poles and the lines. They said, "We will pay you fair market price so that we can maintain them." And they said no, and there was no legal recourse. They had to leave them, even though it's in the public interest and not only public interest, public safety.
I mean, the reason that nuclear power is so successful, my understanding is like 40 or 50% of Germany is nuclear power.
Yeah, I think it's high.
Owned by private organizations,
hmm
run by the government,
Public owned. Yeah.
they know where I'm going with this, but they-
Yeah. No, public owned utilities. That was a point that I wasn't sure I wanted to get into. I don't know if you have thoughts about, because I mean, at this point, they're private. The thought of either buying them out or turning them into public utilities through some sort of governmental means. I don't know if you have thoughts on, one, is that feasible? In the United States, probably not. But if maybe even not feasible, necessary. I think that's a point that was my thought throughout this book. But I will say this, if you read interviews with the author, she recognizes that that's a strong theme through this book, but that she actually thinks it's more complicated, and she does not necessarily blame PG&E, and she doesn't necessarily see them as, like the villain in this, although I read the book, I read it that way. She doesn't necessarily feel that way. And I will point out, in her interview, she said that she sent them the book, PG&E, and they have shared it company-wide and supposedly made it mandatory reading. What that means from a company who, I don't know, didn't take notes on anything for over 100 years means a little bit of nothing to me. But I would love to hear your thoughts.
I think it's really, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because that exact reasoning is how we ended up with utility deregulation, where the generation and transmission are not owned by the same entity, and you're paying a third party for power generation that's done by a different company. And it's so the premise makes sense. We have not applied it in a great way. I think the way that we've applied that idea is very non-ideal, but at the same time, it makes me a little bit uneasy to see AES is publicly traded, and I'm supposed to be relying on them, which, if you're in Marion County, you know that you can't rely on them for much. We lost power at 6 a.m. on a clear day, like 2 days ago, just for no reason at all. And to the fact of not blaming PG&E necessarily, one of the things, here's a fun thought exercise. If you take the infrastructure in Indianapolis and you put that in California, you put that in Hawaii, does it perform any better?
Yeah, not fun.
It's not fun.
I don't like your definition of fun, Rachel. I'm learning that I don't like when you say fun things. Dr. Filippelli, do you have thoughts on?
I'm not an economist, so I couldn't tell you about nationalizing versus not. Fair. Yeah.
That is totally fair. Yeah, that I feel like that's a rabbit hole. That's a different book. That could be a different book. I mean, that is a totally different.
I would love to do the same panel, double the time, and add like a lawyer and an economist. I think that would just.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed this book more than I should have.
You know.
A joke, a lawyer, an economist, a climate scientist, and an electrical engineer walk into a bar?
No, quite literally, yes.
Yeah, what are they going to come up with?
And then what do we talk about? Wildfires. Well, and I, one of the reasons that we picked this book is because we're hearing more frequently, not only in California, we're hearing, obviously we have the wildfires in Hawaii, which I don't know if those were started by electric lines, transmission lines, or the ones in Canada that have been.
Yeah, that wasn't from transmission.
That wasn't from transmission, but I mean, we've been impacted with that smoke now for how many months? So I mean, we're
all summer long. Yeah.
All summer long, it's been terrible. So I mean, we're hearing and feeling the impacts of wildfires that maybe obviously super critical in the state of California. But if you live here in Indiana thinking, I'm not impacted, you absolutely are.
And if you're following along with the Hawaii wildfires, that, obviously that's still ongoing. They haven't made the determination yet. But one of the things that may have contributed or made, a bad situation even worse could have potentially been not shutting the power lines off during high winds, which that was something that the author talks about in this book a lot.
Yeah, they started doing that,
Mhm.
which, I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
and-
upsetting people, but
Yeah, then you have millions of customers without power. So it's,
yeah,
it's the chicken and the egg again. It's climate change and infrastructure.
yeah,
Yeah.
And I think there's only similarity with the Canadian wildfires is their severity is fueled by climate change, right? It's fueled
Yes.
by an increasingly dry litter cover on the ground, which is highly flammable, similar to the California case, right? Or extremes in climate, which we've long predicted this is going to happen. So
Yeah.
it's actually 2023 is not a terrible surprise to me and other climate scientists, but our average climate's going this way, but the difference between extremes are going like that.
yeah.
So we get more flooding and more wildfires. People say you can't make both those things happen at the same time, but yeah, you certainly can, actually. They're
yeah.
not happening at the same time. They're happening in different seasons. But so the Canadian wildfire was fueled by that. The Maui wildfire was supercharged by extremely dry conditions there. The California wildfires are often related to that as well.
Yeah.
So a transmission line falls on a damp forest in Minnesota. What's going to happen? It'll fizzle a pine tree down and maybe kill an owl. But hopefully it's not going to kill any owls. I didn't.
No.
No owls. I want you to. No owls were killed in this entire episode. No, but
Or was that wished upon for any owls?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'm from Florida, bracing for a hurricane right now.
Right
If you
now.
had told me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that we'd be getting hurricanes in September regularly,
Yeah.
that is unheard of for us. So, I mean, yeah, it absolutely goes in both directions. But why don't we just rake the forest? What do you, rake
what
the
was
forest?
interesting is that, and we're not going to get a chance to talk about this, but I don't know if you guys saw this undergrounding argument here, like to put not only distribution lines underground, which Indianapolis has very few distribution lines underground, actually. They're all, that's why our power
Yeah.
goes out all the time,
Yeah.
But to make even the distribution, the high voltage ones underground, granted, I think that's really expensive, but the argument that you got two choices that they're describing in this book. Well, we can either cut down something like 7 million trees,
Oh, yeah, that number was absurd.
or we can bury lines. You wouldn't have to do both, but it's like the last thing we want to do when we have a climate crisis is cut down trees
Oh, yeah.
to make your power transmission safe. It's just that wild thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And burying lines. So it wouldn't be easy or wouldn't be cheap, but you don't actually have to physically go and dig up the entire path.
Oh.
You kind of make an entrance and bore for a certain amount of length.
Oh.
So you're not digging everything up. So it's actually, and I figured a lot of people in here probably don't work in construction, so I wanted to make that
I'm one of 'em.
distinction.
I'm one of them.
You
I
don't
totally thought you're building like
no.
the Marianas Trench down
No.
miles, big old pipes, the whole nine yards.
No.
No.
Well, and
What?
so I wanna tie in another one of my favorite books. If you love downers like this one,
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
Ted-
describe this as a downer, but it's a
Ted-
downer.
Ted Koppel's Lights Out, which I think we actually did for Books, Booze, and Brains a few years ago. He describes these attacks on a lot of our infrastructure that's above ground.
Yeah.
And it's actually gotten way, way, way worse in the last few years. Like hundreds of physical attacks. And when I say physical attacks, like people trying to break into like secure sites, or people using shotguns to shoot transmission lines and distribution transformers. It's very weird. But these attacks have just increased every year. And when entities own their own distribution, so if you have a college campus, if you have a hospital campus, if you have a manufacturing campus, a lot of times they will put a lot of this infrastructure in vaults underground. Their transformers, their generators, all the lines are going to be buried. And that's because, on a hospital campus, on a college campus, you want reliable power. And so when these entities own their own distribution, they're doing the things that we should do everywhere else. But all that is to
Attacks
say,
on power.
but I actually printed out an article. I could have talked about this for like 5 hours. I brought resources.
Oh my gosh. That attacks on power lines. Okay, another new one for me today that I've learned. That's, again, another horrifyingly fun fact with Rachel. I don't like it. Does anyone else want to learn any fun facts from Rachel? Or do we have any more questions for our expert or about the book that you want to discuss? I'm really glad we got to bring up attacking power plants, because that's a new one for me. I got to be honest. But we did hear about that in Nashville, I think. There was an attack on a power distribution plant. So maybe I have heard of this before. You just took me by surprise again. This might be the reason we don't have you back. Because your fun facts aren't fun. Well, if we don't have any more questions, first off, please feel free to come up and talk to both of our guest experts after we close out the video and our recording, because they are a wealth of knowledge and they have wonderful resources about their areas of expertise. And apparently you can get Indiana Electric Code at Half Price Books for $50, as we learned from Rachel in our tournament. So if you ever want to learn about utility codes, I guess go to Half Price Books. Not an ad or a sponsorship. I just love Half Price Books. And with that, I just want to close out and say thank you so much to our two experts, Gabe, Rachel. You're wonderful. It was so great to get to talk to you about this book. Once again, thank you to Ash and Elm for being fantastic and having the best drinks. And to Indiana Humanities, Indiana Sciences, and our public libraries. Thank you all so much. And please, please, please join us next month for an upper. I described this as a downer. This one's an upper. It's called Mathematics for Human Flourishing. Beautiful cover, not just because purple's my favorite color, but it's a beautiful book. And I've already started. And I just want to, if you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to read this book. You said it's like a positive, feel-good book. I just want to read to you this line that I think says everything about what this book's about to be about. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. I love that. And I think that's an omen of things to come and uppers for our next book talk. Yeah. Of course.
Yes. Yeah. So the question is, what's the most impactful thing we could do as a individual, state, as a society to deal with climate crisis? And your point of we did one thing. It is true. We only have done one thing, the Inflation Reduction Act, but it was a $400 billion thing. It's the biggest investment we've ever seen on climate change mitigation. Yeah. And particularly because it was coupled with the infrastructure bill before, which is also monstrous. Oh, yeah. So that speaks to one big thing you can do, which is, do you think that the Inflation Reduction Act would have passed under a different administration? Probably not. So would it have passed under the Biden administration if he hadn't been pestered by youth activists while he was running for office? Nope. No. He was not interested in climate that much. Nope. I mean, he was an old school Democrat. Yep. Right. So you've got the progressives saying we've got to do something on climate. So that's people talking. You have all of us. I don't care how you voted, but if you vote for climate, that's the other thing you can do. Yeah, you can bike to work. I biked to IUPUI today, bike back, really sweaty, took a really quick shower and drove down here like a maniac tonight. Fair. And that's great. Yeah. It's good for you. It's good for, but that's not going to do anything about climate change. It's big stuff that does something about climate change. I say do everything. Do all the small stuff. Eat less meat, fly less. That's all phenomenal. That's wonderful. That doesn't mean fly never. It doesn't mean never eat meat again. But these are the things that you can do personally, but really it's a systemic problem, right? Our power a power grid monopolies. I don't get to choose my power electrons in my house. In
No.
fact, I do, because AES does offer that, but I'll talk about that later separately. But usually they're all monopolies. And so they've been shilling us. This is my high horse. I'll get off of it. They've been shilling us
stay.
on fossil fuels for 50 years. And they've had a very powerful lobby to make sure that happens.
Yep.
And when we start buying less fossil fuels, they switch over to, oh, let's do natural gas. It's natural.
Oh.
Natural gas is
No, not with 100, whatever, right? There will be a point where we probably need to survive. I'm not, I'm gonna keep it. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not built different. So, yeah, terrifying. Again, terrifying, a downer, which is why I'm excited to read a book that can be summarized by the line, every being cries out silently to be read differently. See, that sounds like positive and inspiring, so and I agree, we could sit here and talk for hours, if you would like to, you can come talk to our experts and ask them questions. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all talking about hopefully a cheerier subject, math, which maybe is cheerier. Okay, maybe math isn't a cheerier. We'll have a cheerier time talking about math, and in fact, I thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you. Our Texas discussion. Maybe let's y'all. Get in the more southern.